My name is Marlene, and I just turned 23 years old. I should have been celebrating with cake and candles, surrounded by people who loved me. Instead, I stood in the middle of our grand Connecticut living room, staring at my birthday cake smashed across the marble floor. My mother, Patricia, had just thrown it there. Her face was twisted with rage as she screamed the words that would echo in my mind forever. "You're just a mistake of my past I want to forget." Around us stood my stepfather Richard, my half-sister Vivian, and my half-brother Garrett. None of them moved to defend me. Vivian smirked. Garrett looked away. Richard simply folded his arms. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, but I refused to cry in front of them. That was the moment I stopped being their doormat and started becoming someone they would never forget. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your country or city in the comments below. And if you've ever felt rejected by your own family, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. Subscribe and turn on notifications because what happens next will show you exactly how I turned my pain into power. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of this journey. To understand why Patricia hated me so much, you need to know where I came from. I was born from a one-night mistake when my mother was just 22 years old. She had been a rising model in New York City, beautiful and ambitious, with her whole life ahead of her. Then she met a man named Vincent at a party in Manhattan. He was charming, handsome, and completely unreliable. They spent one night together, and when Patricia discovered she was pregnant 2 months later, Vincent had already vanished without a trace. No phone number, no address, nothing. Patricia tried to find him, but it was like he never existed. Her wealthy family, my grandparents, were horrified by the scandal. In their social circle, having a child out of wedlock was an unforgivable sin. They cut her off financially and emotionally, telling her she had made her bed and now had to lie in it. Patricia was forced to give birth to me alone in a small Brooklyn apartment, working multiple jobs just to keep us fed. For the first 5 years of my life, we lived in poverty. Patricia worked as a waitress during the day and cleaned offices at night. She never smiled at me, never held me close the way mothers were supposed to. Even as a toddler, I could feel her resentment radiating off her like heat from a stove. She would look at me with these cold, distant eyes, as if I were a stranger who had ruined her life. And in her mind, I had. Every time she looked at me, she saw Vincent's betrayal and the death of her modeling dreams. But everything changed when I turned 5, and Patricia met Richard Whitmore at a charity gala where she was serving drinks. Richard was a wealthy finance director, recently divorced, with 2 children from his previous marriage. He was looking for a wife who could manage his household and play the part of the perfect society woman. Patricia was looking for a way out of poverty. They struck a deal disguised as love. Richard would marry her and give her the lifestyle she craved, but only if she agreed to prioritize his children over me. Patricia accepted without hesitation. We moved into Richard's sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut when I was 6 years old. The house was enormous, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and more rooms than I could count. Vivian, who was 10 at the time, and Garrett, who was only 2, were given the best bedrooms on the 2nd floor with views of the manicured gardens. I was shown to a tiny room in the attic, dark and dusty, with a single small window that barely let in any light. From that day forward, my childhood became a living nightmare. Patricia transformed into a different person in front of Richard and his children. She was warm and attentive to Vivian and Garrett, buying them expensive clothes and toys, attending their school events, tucking them in at night. With me, she was ice cold. I became the household servant, forced to do chores from dawn until midnight. I washed dishes, scrubbed floors, did laundry for the entire family, and cleaned everyone's rooms except my own, because I was too exhausted. Vivian quickly learned that she could torment me without consequences. She would rip up my homework, pour her juice on my head during dinner, and then blame me for the mess. When I tried to defend myself, Patricia would slap me across the face and send me to my room without food. Garrett followed his sister's example as he grew older. He would hide my school supplies, push me down the stairs when no one was looking, and laugh when I cried. Richard treated me like I was invisible most of the time, but when he did acknowledge my existence, it was only to give me more work or criticize how I did things. Holidays and birthdays were especially painful. Vivian and Garrett would have elaborate parties with dozens of guests, mountains of presents, and professional entertainers. I would spend those days locked in my attic room, listening to the laughter and music downstairs, wondering what I had done to deserve such cruelty. On my birthdays, there were no cakes, no gifts, no celebrations. Patricia would simply remind me that I was lucky to have a roof over my head and that I should be grateful for Richard's charity. I learned to survive by becoming invisible, by never asking for anything, by teaching myself to cook simple meals from whatever leftovers I could find in the kitchen after everyone had eaten. I did my homework by flashlight after midnight because I wasn't allowed to use electricity in my room during the day. I grew up believing that I was worthless, that I was indeed the mistake my mother said I was. When I turned 16, something miraculous happened at school. I had been studying obsessively, pouring all my pain and frustration into my schoolwork because it was the only thing I could control. My grades were perfect, straight, as in every subject, and I had joined every academic club and competition I could find. The school guidance counselor called me into her office one afternoon and told me I had been selected for a full scholarship to the school's honors program, reserved for only the top 5 students in the entire district. I was overwhelmed with joy. For the first time in my life, I felt like maybe I wasn't worthless after all. Maybe I was smart and capable and deserving of good things. I ran home that day, clutching the scholarship certificate in my hands, my heart pounding with excitement. I imagined Patricia's face lighting up with pride, imagined her hugging me and telling me she was proud of me. I was so naive. When I arrived home, Patricia was hosting an afternoon tea party in the living room with a dozen of her wealthy friends from the country club. They were all dressed in designer clothes, sipping champagne from crystal glasses, discussing their upcoming vacations to Europe and the Caribbean. I burst into the room, breathless and smiling, waving my certificate in the air like a flag of victory. Patricia's face immediately hardened into a mask of fury. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and grabbed my arm so hard that her nails dug into my skin. She dragged me out of the living room and into the hallway, but not far enough that her guests couldn't hear every word she was about to say. Her voice was a venomous hiss that cut through me like broken glass. "You think you're special? You think this little piece of paper makes you worth something? You're nothing but a burden I have to carry every single day. Everything you have, everything you are, is because of Richard's charity. If it weren't for him, you'd be living on the streets where you belong. Don't you ever forget your place in this house." Her words hung in the air like poison as her friends whispered and stared at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. I felt my face burning with shame, tears streaming down my cheeks despite my desperate efforts to hold them back. But the humiliation wasn't over yet. Vivian appeared at the top of the staircase, drawn by the commotion, and when she saw me crying, a cruel smile spread across her beautiful face. She walked down slowly, deliberately, like a predator approaching wounded prey. "Oh look, the charity case is crying again," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "How pathetic. Did you really think Mom would care about some stupid school award? You're not part of this family, Marlene. You never were and you never will be." One of Patricia's friends, a woman with too much plastic surgery and too little empathy, chimed in with false sweetness. "Patricia, you really are too kind to keep her. Most people would have sent a child like that to foster care long ago. You're a saint for putting up with all this drama." Patricia nodded graciously, playing the role of the martyred mother perfectly. "I know, Margaret. But I'm trying to be a good person, even when it's incredibly difficult. Someone has to teach her about gratitude and humility." I stood there, frozen, my scholarship certificate crumpling in my shaking hands, as the room full of wealthy women looked at me like I was garbage that needed to be taken out. That night, I locked myself in my attic room and cried until I had no tears left. But somewhere in the darkness of that terrible night, something shifted inside me. I made a decision that would change everything. I decided that I would never, ever let them see me weak again. I would never beg for their love or approval. Instead, I would become so successful, so strong, so undeniable, that they would regret every cruel word they had ever spoken to me. I started working in secret, taking odd jobs around the neighborhood. I babysat for families down the street, washed cars at the local gas station on weekends, tutored younger students in math and science. Every dollar I earned went into a shoebox hidden under the loose floorboard in my room. I researched college scholarships, financial aid programs, anything that could help me escape. I spent hours in the school library reading about successful people who had overcome terrible childhoods. If they could do it, so could I. The scholarship incident taught me a valuable lesson. I could never depend on Patricia or Richard or anyone in that house for anything. I was completely alone, but I was also free to create my own future. I was 17 when Garrett started acting different toward me. He was 12 years old then, still young but old enough to understand right from wrong. One evening, I was in the kitchen washing dishes after dinner when he approached me with an unusual expression on his face. Instead of his typical sneer or dismissive glance, he looked almost friendly. He asked me how school was going, whether I needed any help with my chores, even offered to dry the dishes while I washed them. I was shocked. In all the years we had lived together, Garrett had never shown me a single moment of kindness. I should have known better. I should have trusted my instincts. But I was so desperate for human connection, so starved for even the tiniest crumb of familial affection, that I allowed myself to believe maybe he was finally growing up and seeing me as a real person. Over the next few weeks, Garrett continued to be nice to me. He would ask me to help him with his homework, and I would spend hours patiently explaining math problems and science concepts. He brought me cookies one day, claiming he had baked them himself and wanted me to be the first to try them. I was touched, genuinely believing that I had finally found an ally in that horrible house. Then came the trap. One Saturday afternoon, Richard stormed into the kitchen where I was preparing lunch and grabbed me by the shoulder so roughly that I dropped the knife I was holding. His face was red with rage, his eyes bulging as he dragged me into the living room where Patricia, Vivian, and Garrett were waiting. On the coffee table sat Richard's prized Rolex watch, the one he had inherited from his father, worth more than $50,000. Next to it was a small cloth bag that I had never seen before in my life. Richard's voice was like thunder as he pointed at the watch and then at me. "Where did you find this, Garrett?" he demanded, his eyes never leaving my face. Garrett's voice was small and trembling, and when I looked at him, I saw that his eyes were red as if he had been crying. "In her room, Dad," he whispered, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "I saw her take it from your bedroom 3 days ago." I didn't want to say anything because I thought maybe she would return it and realize she made a mistake. But when I checked her room today, it was hidden under her mattress. "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have told you sooner." The world seemed to tilt sideways as his words registered in my brain. I had never been in Richard's bedroom except to clean it, and I certainly had never stolen anything from anyone in my entire life. I tried to speak, to defend myself, to explain that this was impossible, but Richard's hand struck me across the face before I could form the words. "You ungrateful little thief," he roared. "After everything we've done for you, after we gave you a home and food and clothes, this is how you repay us? By stealing from us." Patricia stood behind him with her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold satisfaction. "I always knew you had bad blood in you, Marlene, like father, like daughter. Vincent was a liar and a thief, and so are you. It's in your genes." Vivian was practically glowing with triumph, her smile so wide it looked painful. "I can't believe you thought you could get away with this," she said with false sympathy. "Did you really think we wouldn't notice?" Richard pronounced his judgment with the authority of a king sentencing a criminal. I was grounded for 3 months. No phone, no internet, no leaving the house except for school. I would have to work double the amount of chores to pay off the insult of my attempted theft, even though I would never see a single dollar for my labor. I was sent to my room in disgrace while they all stayed downstairs, probably celebrating their successful destruction of whatever dignity I had left. I lay on my thin mattress in the darkness, my mind racing. I knew I hadn't taken that watch. I knew this was a setup. But who would do this and why? The answer came to me later that night when Garrett crept up to my attic room. He knocked softly on my door, and when I opened it, expecting maybe an apology or an explanation, I found him standing there with that same innocent expression he had worn downstairs. But his eyes told a different story. They were cold and calculating, void of any real emotion. He leaned in close and whispered so softly that I almost didn't hear him. "You should have known better than to trust me, Marlene. Vivian paid me $50 to plant that watch in your room and tell Dad I saw you take it. Easiest money I ever made. You're so pathetic, thinking anyone in this family could ever actually like you. He turned and walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing there with my mouth open in shock and my heart breaking all over again. That night marked the end of any hope I had for reconciliation with my family. Garrett had proven that even a 12-year-old child in that house was capable of calculated cruelty. I realized that Vivian and Garrett were working together, probably with Patricia's knowledge if not her direct encouragement, to make my life as miserable as possible. I needed to be smarter, more careful, more strategic. I needed to survive long enough to escape. By the time I was 18 and in my senior year of high school, I had transformed myself into an academic powerhouse. My GPA was a perfect 4.0. I had taken every advanced placement class available. I was president of the debate club, captain of the academic decathlon team, and a volunteer tutor for underprivileged children at the local community center. Everything I did was part of my escape plan. I applied to 10 universities across the country, carefully selecting schools that offered generous financial aid packages for students from low-income backgrounds. I had to lie on the applications, claiming I lived with a single mother in a small apartment, because if I told the truth about living in a mansion in Greenwich, I would never qualify for the help I desperately needed. My dream school was Columbia University in Manhattan. I wrote a powerful personal essay about overcoming adversity, about finding strength in suffering, about refusing to let your circumstances define your future. My guidance counselor at school told me I had an excellent chance of admission with a full scholarship. For the first time in years, I felt genuine hope blooming in my chest like a flower pushing through concrete. But Vivian found out about my applications. She was 23 years old then, working at a prestigious law firm in Manhattan, and she had her own bitter history with Columbia. She had applied there 5 years earlier and been rejected, a fact that still ate at her pride like acid. The thought that I, her despised half-sister, the family disgrace, might get into Columbia when she had failed was more than Vivian could tolerate. She started plotting my destruction with the same cold precision she used in her legal work. One night, while I was at my evening shift washing dishes at a local restaurant, Vivian broke into my attic room. She knew I kept my laptop hidden under my bed, password protected but not impossible to crack for someone with her resources. She spent 2 hours systematically destroying my entire college application process. She deleted all my saved essay drafts, my letters of recommendation that teachers had sent me as attachments, my carefully compiled spreadsheets tracking deadlines and requirements, but she didn't stop there. Using my email account, she composed messages to 5 of the universities I had applied to, including Columbia, and wrote in my name that I was withdrawing my applications because I had been accepted elsewhere and was no longer interested. She sent the emails at 2 in the morning, knowing I wouldn't check my account until after school the next day. When I discovered what had happened, I felt like the ground had opened up beneath my feet. I frantically called each university's admissions office, trying to explain that there had been a mistake, that someone had hacked my account, that I desperately wanted to remain in consideration. But it was too late. Application deadlines had passed, and once a withdrawal was submitted, it was nearly impossible to reverse the decision within the tight timeline. Most of the admissions officers were sympathetic but firm. Rules were rules. I had withdrawn, and they had already filled their slots with other candidates. I knew immediately who was responsible. The timing, the method, the cruelty of it all pointed directly at Vivian. I confronted Patricia, hoping against hope that even she would see this was going too far. I found her in her bedroom, applying makeup before heading to a charity luncheon. I told her everything, my voice shaking with anger and desperation, explaining how Vivian had sabotaged my future. Patricia's response was to turn around and slap me so hard across the face that I stumbled backward into the wall. "How dare you accuse your sister of such things?" she screamed. "Vivian works hard every single day at that law firm. She's successful and respected. You're just jealous because you know you'll never be half the woman she is. This is your own fault, Marlene. You probably forgot to submit your applications properly because you're incompetent, and now you're trying to blame Vivian for your failures." Richard heard the commotion and appeared in the doorway. When Patricia explained my accusations, his lip curled in disgust. "Maybe you're not college material after all," he said with a shrug. Not everyone is smart enough for university. You should be grateful if you can find work as a secretary or a store clerk. Vivian must have been listening from somewhere nearby because she suddenly appeared, her eyes red and puffy as if she had been crying, her voice trembling with false hurt. I can't believe she would say such horrible things about me. Vivian sobbed, burying her face in Patricia's shoulder. I've never done anything but try to help her, and this is how she repays me. Garrett, who was 15 by then, nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, Marlene has always been jealous of Vivian. She's always making up stories to get attention. She's pathetic. I stood there, surrounded by their lies, realizing that no one would ever believe me, that I was completely alone in this fight. But I refused to give up. I spent the next week calling universities directly, emailing admissions departments, explaining my situation to anyone who would listen. Most ignored me. Some responded with polite rejections. But finally, one small college in upstate New York called Hartwell College agreed to review my case. They had one scholarship slot remaining, and if I could submit a complete application within 72 hours, they would consider me. I worked around the clock, rewriting essays from memory, contacting teachers for new recommendation letters, gathering transcripts. I submitted everything with minutes to spare before the deadline. 2 weeks of agonizing silence followed my application to Hartwell College. Every day felt like an eternity as I checked my email obsessively, refreshing the page every few minutes, praying for good news. During those 2 weeks, life at home became even more unbearable. Patricia seemed to take pleasure in my anxiety, making snide comments at dinner about how I should start looking for jobs at fast food restaurants since I had blown my chance at college. Vivian would laugh and suggest I could always work as a maid, since I already had so much experience cleaning up after other people. Richard remained coldly indifferent, treating me like furniture that occasionally needed to be told where to stand. I felt myself sinking into despair, wondering if maybe they were right, maybe I really was destined to fail. But then, something unexpected happened. My English teacher, Miss Brennan, called me into her classroom after school one afternoon. She was a woman in her mid-30s, with kind eyes and a gentle voice that made students feel safe enough to share their struggles. I had never told her about my home situation, but teachers aren't blind, and she had noticed things over the years that my bruised arms occasionally visible beneath my sleeves, the fact that I never had lunch money and often looked hungry, the way I flinched when people raised their voices. Miss Brennan closed the door behind me and gestured for me to sit down. Her expression was serious, but warm as she leaned against her desk and folded her arms. Marlene, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you deserve honesty. I've been teaching for 15 years, and in all that time, I've never had a student quite like you. Your essays are brilliant, your analysis is sophisticated beyond your years, and your determination is remarkable. But I also see a young woman who is carrying a burden that no teenager should have to carry alone. Her words broke through the walls I had built around my heart, and before I could stop myself, tears were streaming down my face. I told her everything. I told her about Patricia's hatred, about Vivian sabotaging my college applications, about Garrett's betrayal, about Richard's coldness, about spending my entire childhood being treated like a servant in my own home. Miss Brennan listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker and more troubled with every detail I shared. When I finally finished, exhausted from the emotional purging, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. Marlene, what they're doing to you is abuse. You understand that, don't you? This is normal family conflict. This is systematic, emotional, and psychological abuse, and you deserve so much better. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of my transcripts, essays I had written for her class, and letters of recommendation she had prepared without me knowing. I've been watching you struggle, and I've been preparing for this moment, she explained. I didn't know exactly what was happening at home, but I knew you needed help. I've already written a very detailed letter to Hartwell College, explaining your exceptional circumstances. I've also contacted the principal and the school counselor, and we've documented everything you've told me today. If you want to pursue legal action against your family for abuse and neglect, we will support you. But right now, the most important thing is getting you into college and out of that house. She picked up her phone and called Hartwell College's admissions office, right there in front of me. She spoke with the director of admissions for nearly 30 minutes, passionately advocating for my acceptance, explaining my situation in detail, vouching for my character and abilities. I sat there in shock, unable to believe that someone was actually fighting for me, that someone actually cared whether I succeeded or failed. When she hung up, she was smiling. "They're going to make a decision by the end of the week," she said. "And based on what I just heard, I'm very optimistic." 3 days later, I received the email that changed my life. Hartwell College had accepted me with a full academic scholarship covering tuition, room, and board. Additionally, Miss Brennan had helped me apply for a special grant program that would provide me with a monthly stipend for living expenses, books, and supplies. I had enough money to survive. I had a way out. I collapsed in the school library where I had opened the email, sobbing with relief and joy and disbelief. Miss Brennan found me there an hour later and wrapped me in a hug that felt like the first real maternal affection I had ever received. "You did this, Marlene," she whispered. "You survived, and now you're going to thrive. I'm so proud of you." I made a decision in that moment. I would not tell my family about my acceptance until the very last possible minute. I didn't want to give them any opportunity to sabotage this final chance at freedom. For the next 3 months, I continued to play the role of the obedient servant, doing my chores, keeping my head down, counting the days until I could leave. I worked extra hours at my restaurant job and saved every penny for the things I would need at college. Miss Brennan met with me weekly to help me prepare, teaching me about college life, helping me shop for necessary supplies at thrift stores, making sure I had everything I needed. 1 week before I was scheduled to leave for Hartwell College, I finally told them. It was a Sunday evening, and the whole family was gathered in the living room watching television. I walked in and stood in front of the screen until Richard angrily told me to move. Instead of obeying, I took a deep breath and announced in the steadiest voice I could manage, "I'm leaving next week for college. I've been accepted to Hartwell College with a full scholarship, and I won't be coming back." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's face went white, then red, then purple with rage. She stood up so quickly that she knocked over her wine glass, sending red liquid spreading across the expensive white carpet like blood. "You think you can just leave?" she shrieked. "Who's going to do all the housework? Who's going to cook and clean and do the laundry? You selfish, ungrateful brat. After everything we've done for you." Richard's voice was ice cold as he pointed a finger at me like a weapon. "You'll be back within a month, begging us to take you back when you fail. You're not smart enough for college. You're not strong enough to survive on your own. You'll come crawling back, and we might not be feeling generous enough to let you in." Vivian laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the room. "This is going to be hilarious to watch. Good riddance, Marlene. At least we won't have to look at your miserable face anymore. Don't come back crying when reality hits you." Garrett, now 15, and fully corrupted by his family's values, added his own poison. "Yeah, don't come back begging when you fail out. We won't want you." I looked at each of them in turn, these people who should have loved me but instead had tortured me for 18 years, and I felt nothing but cold emptiness where pain used to live. "I won't fail," I said quietly, "and I won't come back. Not ever. You're not my family, you never were." I turned and walked up to my attic room for the last time. I packed my few belongings into a single, small suitcase that Miss Brennan had given me, mostly clothes from thrift stores and the small collection of books I had managed to acquire over the years. I didn't take anything that belonged to them, not a towel or a pillow or a single hanger. I didn't want anything that would remind me of this place. The next morning, before anyone else was awake, I walked out of that house with my suitcase in one hand and my acceptance letter in the other. Miss Brennan was waiting in her car at the end of the driveway to drive me to campus. I didn't look back. I never looked back. My first year at Hartwell College was simultaneously the hardest and most liberating time of my life. For the first time ever, I was living in a place where no one screamed at me, where I wasn't expected to serve everyone around me, where I could focus on learning without fear of punishment. My roommate in the dormitory was a girl named Fern, a cheerful pre-med student from Vermont who came from a large, loving family. She was shocked when I told her bits and pieces of my story, unable to comprehend how a mother could treat her own child so cruelly. Fern became my first real friend, teaching me what normal relationships looked like, how people were supposed to treat each other with kindness and respect. I also became close with a classmate named Elliot, a quiet, thoughtful guy who was studying computer science. He helped me with the technology I had never learned to use properly at home, patiently showing me how to navigate various software programs and online resources. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But surviving at college was still incredibly difficult. The scholarship covered my tuition and provided a small dorm room and basic meal plan, but there were countless other expenses I hadn't anticipated: textbooks that cost hundreds of dollars, lab fees, art supplies for my required humanities classes, winter clothes suitable for the brutal upstate New York, cold, basic toiletries and school supplies. The monthly stipend from the grant program helped, but it wasn't nearly enough. I found myself working 3 part-time jobs just to make ends meet. Shelving books at the college library for 10 hours a week, waitressing at a coffee shop in town every weekend, and tutoring high school students in English and math 2 evenings a week. Between classes and work, I barely had time to sleep. I would study late into the night, surviving on cheap instant noodles and endless cups of black coffee from the dining hall. My grades were excellent, despite my exhaustion, because I was terrified that if I slipped even slightly, I might lose my scholarship and be forced to return to that house. That fear drove me forward when my body wanted to collapse. During my second year, something wonderful happened. I was offered an internship at a respected marketing firm in Manhattan. The position was competitive, with only 3 slots available out of hundreds of applicants from colleges across the state. The internship would run through the summer and into the fall semester, and it paid $15 an hour, which felt like a fortune to me. More importantly, it was relevant experience in the field I hoped to pursue after graduation. I was overjoyed, seeing this as validation that I was finally building a real future for myself. I posted a picture of myself standing in front of the company's office building on my social media account. Caption: "Dreams do come true if you work hard enough." It was a moment of pride and happiness, a rare bright spot in my difficult journey. What I didn't realize was that Vivian still followed my social media accounts from a fake profile I didn't know about. She saw my post, and it ignited a fury in her that I couldn't have imagined. Vivian, who worked at a large corporate law firm in Manhattan, had built an extensive network of professional connections throughout the city. She knew people everywhere, including, as fate would have it, someone who knew the CEO of the marketing firm where I would be interning. Vivian made a phone call. She introduced herself as my concerned older sister, her voice dripping with false worry as she spoke to the firm's director of human resources. She spun an elaborate web of lies, claiming that I had serious mental health issues that made me unstable and potentially dangerous in a workplace environment. She said I had been in and out of psychiatric facilities throughout my teenage years, that I had been caught stealing from family members multiple times, that I had violent outbursts when stressed. She even went so far as to fabricate medical documents using her legal skills, creating fake psychiatric evaluations and police reports that looked disturbingly authentic. She sent these documents to the firm with a follow-up email, again pretending to be a worried family member who felt obligated to warn them before something terrible happened. The director of human resources panicked. The firm was relatively small and couldn't afford any kind of scandal or liability. Without even contacting me to ask my side of the story, without doing any real investigation into the validity of Vivian's claims, they made a decision. On what was supposed to be my 3rd day of work, I was called into an office and told that my internship was being suspended pending an investigation into concerning allegations about my background and mental health. I was devastated and confused. I had no idea what allegations they were talking about. When I pressed for details, they were vague and uncomfortable, clearly not wanting to say too much for legal reasons. They told me to go home and wait for contact from their legal department. I never heard from them again. Weeks later, I managed to piece together what had happened through a sympathetic employee who felt guilty about how I had been treated. When I learned that Vivian was behind it, that she had deliberately destroyed this opportunity out of pure spite and jealousy, something inside me broke. I had been so careful, so determined to build a life away from their toxicity, and yet Vivian had reached across the distance to hurt me once again. The loss of the internship wasn't just about money or experience. It was about the message it sent, that no matter how far I ran or how hard I worked, my family could still destroy anything good that came into my life. Without the internship income, I was drowning financially. I picked up more shifts at the coffee shop, started doing people's laundry for money, even donated plasma twice a week for the small payment. I was working so many hours that my grades started to slip. I was exhausted all the time, running on 3 or 4 hours of sleep per night, surviving on vending machine food because I didn't have time to eat proper meals. One night, sitting alone in my dorm room with unpaid bills spread across my desk and my bank account showing a balance of $12, I broke down completely. I sobbed into my pillow, wondering if Patricia had been right all along, if I really was worthless, if maybe I should just give up and accept that I was destined to fail. Fern found me like that around midnight when she came back from studying at the library. She took one look at me and immediately sat down on my bed, pulling me into a tight hug. "Don't you dare give up," she said fiercely. "I don't know what happened, but I know you, Marlene. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You've survived things that would have destroyed most people. Whatever this is, you'll survive it too. But you don't have to survive it alone. Let me help. Let Elliot help. Let your friends carry some of this weight." That night, through tears and exhaustion, I told Fern and Elliot everything. I told them about my childhood, about the sabotaged college applications, about Vivian destroying my internship. They listened with growing horror and anger, and when I finished, Elliot said something that would change everything. "My dad is a lawyer," he said quietly. "He specializes in cases involving defamation and wrongful termination. I think you should talk to him. What Vivian did isn't just cruel, it's illegal." Elliot's father, Conrad Fisher, agreed to meet with me the following Saturday at his office in a small town about 30 minutes from campus. Elliot drove me there in his beat-up Honda, and I spent the entire drive feeling nauseous with anxiety. I had never dealt with lawyers before, and I was terrified that even this kind stranger would somehow find a way to blame me or tell me there was nothing that could be done. Conrad's office was modest but professional, lined with law books and framed certificates. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with graying hair and warm brown eyes that reminded me of Elliot. He shook my hand firmly and invited me to sit down, offering me coffee and water, treating me with a respect I wasn't accustomed to receiving. For the next 2 hours, I told him my entire story from beginning to end. I told him about Patricia's rejection, about the years of abuse and servitude, about Garrett's betrayal, about Vivian's sabotage of my college applications, and her destruction of my internship. Conrad listened intently, taking notes, asking clarifying questions, but never interrupting or dismissing anything I said. When I finished, there was a long moment of silence. Conrad leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful and troubled. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was filled with a quiet anger that made me believe he truly understood the injustice of what had been done to me. "Marlene, what Vivian did to you constitutes several serious legal violations. She created false documents, impersonated a concerned family member to damage your professional reputation, and directly interfered with your employment contract. That's defamation, fraud, and tortious interference at minimum. What your entire family has done to you over the years could also be considered emotional abuse and possibly financial exploitation, given that you were forced to work without compensation as a minor." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting mine with intensity. "Here's what I want to do. I want to investigate Vivian's actions thoroughly. I want to gather evidence, interview witnesses, build a case that is absolutely airtight, and then I want to sue her for every illegal thing she's done to you. Not just for the money, although you deserve compensation for the damage she's caused, but to send a message that she can't keep destroying your life without consequences. Are you willing to fight back?" I hesitated. The thought of taking on Vivian legally terrified me. She had money, connections, a powerful law firm backing her. What did I have? But then I thought about that night in my dorm room, sobbing into my pillow, ready to give up on everything I had worked so hard to achieve. I thought about all the years of abuse. All the times I had swallowed my pain and pretended everything was fine. I was tired of being a victim. I was tired of running. "Yes," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I want to fight back." Conrad smiled, and it was the smile of a warrior preparing for battle. Good, then let's get to work. Over the next several months, Conrad launched a thorough investigation into Vivian's actions. He hired a private investigator who discovered that the company had saved all the emails and documents Vivian had sent them. The fake psychiatric reports she had created were traced back to her office computer. Even more damning, the marketing firm's phone system automatically recorded all incoming calls, and they still had the recording of Vivian's initial phone call where she had lied about me. Conrad was able to obtain this evidence through legal discovery processes, and with each new piece of proof, our case grew stronger. The private investigator also interviewed my former teachers, including Miss Brennan, who provided detailed statements about the abuse I had suffered at home and the sabotage I had faced. Several of my childhood neighbors came forward as well, people who had witnessed Patricia's cruelty over the years but had never thought it was their place to intervene. The case Conrad was building was devastating in its thoroughness. He also reached out to the marketing firm on my behalf. When confronted with evidence that they had terminated my internship based on fraudulent information without conducting any real investigation, they became very nervous about their own legal liability. Within weeks, they offered me a settlement that included back pay for the internship I should have completed, a formal letter of apology, and a glowing letter of recommendation for future employment. It wasn't nearly enough to compensate for what I had gone through, but it was something. It was validation. Then came the moment I had been both dreading and anticipating. Conrad sent a formal legal notice to Vivian and Richard, informing them that I was suing Vivian for defamation, fraud, and intentional interference with my employment, seeking damages of $200,000. The lawsuit detailed every lie Vivian had told, every document she had forged, every action she had taken to deliberately destroy my opportunities. It also included statements from witnesses describing the years of abuse I had endured from the entire family. When Vivian received that notice, she must have felt her perfect world crumbling around her. She called Patricia in a panic, and Patricia immediately called me for the first time in 2 years. Her voice on the phone was a mixture of rage and desperation. "How dare you sue your own sister?" she screamed. "After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us? You're trying to destroy this family." I had been preparing for this moment with Conrad's help. My voice was calm and cold as I responded. "You never did anything for me except hurt me. You treated me like a servant and told me I was a mistake. Vivian tried to ruin my life multiple times, and now she's going to face the consequences. If you want to call that destroying the family, then so be it, but I prefer to call it justice." Patricia sputtered and threatened, but I simply hung up on her. It felt powerful in a way I had never experienced before. 6 months after filing the lawsuit, we finally had our day in court. The trial took place in a Manhattan courthouse on a cold morning in November. I sat next to Conrad at the plaintiff's table, my hands shaking despite my best efforts to appear calm. Across the aisle, Vivian sat with her expensive legal team, 3 lawyers in $1,000 suits who had been hired by Richard to defend his stepdaughter. Vivian looked different than I remembered. Her face was drawn and pale, her eyes red-rimmed as if she hadn't been sleeping well. Good, I thought coldly. Let her feel some of the anxiety and pain she's caused me. Behind the defense table, sitting in the public gallery, were Patricia, Richard, and Garrett. Patricia looked older, her carefully maintained appearance showing cracks in the foundation. Richard's face was a mask of barely controlled fury. Garrett, now 17, looked uncomfortable and kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The trial lasted 3 days. Conrad methodically presented our evidence: the recorded phone call of Vivian lying to the marketing firm, the fake psychiatric documents she had created with timestamps and metadata proving they came from her computer, emails and text messages showing her coordination with others to sabotage my life, testimony from the marketing firms, HR director describing how they had been deceived, statements from my teachers and neighbors describing the abuse I had suffered at home. Vivian's lawyers tried every tactic they could think of to undermine our case. They argued that Vivian had acted out of genuine concern for my well-being and had truly believed I was mentally unstable. They tried to paint me as a vindictive person seeking revenge for normal family conflicts. They even attempted to claim that the stress of maintaining a relationship with me had damaged Vivian's own mental health. But Conrad destroyed every argument with cold, hard facts. During cross-examination, Vivian took the stand to defend herself. She tried to maintain her composure, presenting herself as the caring older sister who had only wanted to protect a company from potential liability. But Conrad was relentless. He walked her through each lie she had told, each document she had forged, each deliberate action she had taken to harm me. With each question, Vivian became more flustered, her answers less coherent. Finally, Conrad played the recording of her phone call to the marketing firm. Vivian's voice filled the courtroom, dripping with false concern as she described me as dangerous and unstable, as she fabricated stories about psychiatric hospitalizations and violent behavior. When the recording ended, the courtroom was silent. Vivian's face had gone completely white. "Miss Whitmore," Conrad said quietly, "every single statement you made in that phone call was a deliberate lie, wasn't it?" Vivian's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her lawyers objected, but the damage was done. The jury had heard the truth in her own voice. On the third day, after both sides had presented all their evidence and made their closing arguments, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood and read their verdict. They found in my favor on all counts: defamation, fraud, and intentional interference with my employment. The judge asked about damages, and the jury 4 women continued reading. They awarded me $50,000 in compensatory damages for lost income, emotional distress, and harm to my professional reputation. They also awarded me $25,000 in punitive damages, sending a message that Vivian's behavior was so egregious that it warranted additional punishment. $75,000 total. I sat there in shock, unable to process what I was hearing. Conrad placed a hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. "You won," he whispered. "You stood up to them. And you won." But the judge wasn't finished. He also issued an order requiring Vivian to post a public apology on her social media accounts, acknowledging that she had lied about me and expressing genuine remorse for the harm she had caused. He gave her 30 days to comply or face additional penalties for contempt of court. Vivian's lawyers tried to argue, but the judge was firm. The damage to my reputation had been public, and therefore the correction needed to be public as well. As we left the courtroom, I had to walk past my family. Patricia tried to grab my arm, her eyes wild with rage and something that might have been fear. "You've destroyed this family," she hissed. "Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" I pulled my arm away from her grip and looked her directly in the eyes. "I didn't destroy this family, Patricia. You did. You destroyed it the moment you chose to treat your own daughter like garbage. You destroyed it every time you let Vivian and Garrett torture me without consequences. You destroyed it when you told me I was just a mistake you wanted to forget. All I did was refuse to let you destroy me, too." Richard stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "You'll never see a penny of that money. Well, appeal this decision all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to. I'll spend every dollar I have to make sure you get nothing." Conrad stepped between us, his voice professional but firm. "Mr. Whitmore, I would strongly advise against that course of action. Any appeals will be unsuccessful given the overwhelming evidence against your stepdaughter, and further legal action will only result in additional legal fees for you and possible additional damages if we countersue for harassment. The judgment stands. My client will receive her compensation within 60 days, or we will begin asset seizure proceedings." Richard looked like he wanted to hit someone, but even he wasn't foolish enough to assault someone in a courthouse hallway filled with security. He turned and stalked away, Patricia following behind him. Garrett lingered for a moment, and for the first time in years, he looked at me with something other than contempt. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. So quietly I almost didn't hear him. For what I did with the watch. For everything. I studied his face, trying to determine if this was another manipulation or genuine remorse. I decided it didn't matter. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "But sorry doesn't undo the damage. You made your choices, now you get to live with them." I walked away, leaving him standing there in the hallway. The aftermath of the trial was swift and brutal for Vivian. Her law firm, which had built its reputation on ethical practices and integrity, fired her immediately after the verdict became public. No other reputable firm would hire her after she had been publicly exposed as someone who forged documents and lied under oath, even if it was in a civil case rather than a criminal one. Her legal career, which she had worked so hard to build, was essentially over. She was forced to move back into Richard and Patricia's house, unemployed and disgraced, the family golden child reduced to living in her childhood bedroom at 28 years old. The $75,000 judgment was paid in full within the required 60-day period. Richard tried every legal maneuver to avoid payment, but Conrad was prepared for each one. When the money finally hit my bank account, I sat in my dorm room staring at the number on my computer screen, unable to believe it was real. It was more money than I had ever imagined having. With that money, I paid off my student loans, bought a reliable used car, moved into a small but safe apartment near campus, and invested the rest in a savings account for graduate school. For the first time in my life, I had financial security. I wasn't rich by any means, but I wasn't drowning anymore either. The constant anxiety about how I would pay for my next meal, or whether I could afford my textbooks, finally lifted. I could breathe. 2 years passed after the trial, and my life transformed in ways I had never dared to dream. I graduated from Hartwell College with highest honors, a perfect 4.0 GPA, and multiple awards for academic excellence. The scholarship I had fought so hard for had been just the beginning. With the money from the lawsuit providing a financial cushion, I was able to focus fully on my studies and extracurricular activities without the crushing burden of working 3 jobs simultaneously. I was accepted into the graduate program at New York University with a full scholarship to pursue my master's degree in marketing and communications. The same Columbia University that Vivian had once been rejected from and that I had been sabotaged from attending as an undergraduate reached out to me, offering me a prestigious internship in their marketing department. The irony was not lost on me. I rented a small studio apartment in Brooklyn, not far from where Patricia and I had lived when I was very young. The neighborhood had been gentrified since then, but I liked the symbolism of returning to the place where my story had begun, this time on my own terms and with my own money. I decorated my apartment exactly how I wanted it, with plants on every windowsill, shelves full of books I had always wanted to read, and photos of the people who truly mattered. Fern, who was now in medical school but still my best friend, Elliot, who had become a successful software developer and remained one of my closest confidants, Miss Brennan, who I still had lunch with every few months, and Conrad, who had become something of a father figure to me. These were my real family, the people who had chosen to love and support me when I had nothing to offer them in return. My career flourished in ways I had never imagined possible. The marketing firm that had wrongfully terminated my internship had given me such a glowing recommendation letter as part of our settlement that every company I applied to was impressed. I landed a position at a major marketing agency in Manhattan, working with high-profile clients and earning a salary that seemed almost absurd compared to the poverty I had known. Within a year, I was promoted to senior associate. My colleagues respected me, my bosses valued my work, and I was finally experiencing what it felt like to be appreciated for my abilities rather than demeaned for my existence. I threw myself into helping other young people who came from difficult backgrounds. I volunteered as a mentor for foster youth aging out of the system, helping them navigate college applications and job interviews. I donated money to scholarship funds for students from low-income families. I spoke at my old high school about overcoming adversity, and after my speech, dozens of students came up to me with tears in their eyes, telling me that my story gave them hope that they too could escape their circumstances. During those 2 years, Patricia tried to contact me multiple times. She sent letters to my old dorm address that were eventually forwarded to me. She sent emails that I left unread. She even tried to call me from different phone numbers, thinking I wouldn't recognize them. I ignored every attempt. I had said everything I needed to say to her in that courthouse hallway, and I had no interest in reopening wounds that were finally starting to heal. But then, 2 years and 3 months after the trial, I received a letter that was different from the others. It was handwritten in Patricia's distinctive looping script, and something about it made me actually open it rather than throwing it away unopened like I had the others. The letter was short. Patricia wrote that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer. that she was undergoing treatment, and that facing her own mortality had made her realize how badly she had failed me as a mother. She wrote that she didn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted the opportunity to apologize face to face, to tell me things she should have said 20 years ago. She asked if I would meet her for coffee, just once, and then she would never bother me again if that's what I wanted. I sat with that letter for 3 days, reading it over and over, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it like I had ignored everything else she had sent. But another part of me, the part that had spent years in therapy learning to process my trauma in healthy ways, wondered if having this conversation might provide some sense of closure. I called Conrad and asked his advice. He listened carefully and then said something wise. "Marlene, you don't owe her anything. Not your time, not your forgiveness, not even your presence. But if you think having this conversation might help you find peace, then do it for yourself, not for her. Just remember that you're in control now. You get to set the terms. You get to walk away whenever you want. She doesn't have any power over you anymore unless you give it to her." So I agreed to meet Patricia, but only in a public place during daylight hours, with a friend nearby just in case. We met at a small cafe in Manhattan on a Saturday afternoon. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table near the window where I could see her approaching. When Patricia walked in, I barely recognized her. She had aged dramatically since I last saw her in the courthouse 2 years ago. Her hair, which she had always kept perfectly dyed and styled, was now streaked with gray and pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked thin, almost frail, and moved carefully as if her body hurt. The cancer treatment had clearly taken its toll. She saw me and walked over slowly, her eyes filling with tears before she even sat down. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, her voice hoarse. "I wasn't sure you would." I didn't respond, just gestured for her to sit. I had decided beforehand that I would listen to what she had to say, but I would not make this easy for her. She didn't deserve easy. Patricia ordered a tea and then turned to face me fully. Her hands were shaking as she wrapped them around the warm cup. "I don't know where to start," she began. "I've been thinking about what I wanted to say to you for months, but now that you're sitting here in front of me, all my prepared words seem inadequate." She took a deep breath and continued. "I was a terrible mother to you, Marlene. Worse than terrible. I was cruel and abusive, and I blamed you for things that were never your fault. You were an innocent child, and I treated you like you were the source of all my problems. The truth is, I was angry at Vincent for abandoning me, angry at my parents for cutting me off, angry at myself for getting pregnant and ruining my career. But instead of dealing with those feelings like an adult, I took all that anger out on you. Every time I looked at you, I saw my failures reflected back at me, and I hated you for it." Tears were streaming down her face now, but I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, nothing. I had cried all my tears for this woman years ago. When I married Richard, I thought I could finally have the life I wanted, but the price was pushing you even further away. Richard made it clear from the beginning that his children came first, and I agreed because I was more concerned with financial security than with your well-being. I let Vivian and Garrett treat you horribly. I stood by while Richard used you as free labor. I knew it was wrong, but I told myself that you were strong enough to handle it, that you would be fine. But you weren't fine. You were suffering, and I caused that suffering. Patricia reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I pulled back. She nodded, understanding, and withdrew her hand. The cancer diagnosis forced me to look at my life and ask myself what I would regret if I died tomorrow. And the answer was clear. I would regret never telling you that. I'm sorry. I would regret never acknowledging that you deserved so much better than what I gave you. You were a beautiful, intelligent, kind child who deserved to be loved, and instead I treated you like garbage. I can never take back the years of pain I caused you. I can never undo the damage. But I need you to know that none of it was your fault. You were never a mistake. You were never worthless. You were never anything but a precious little girl who needed her mother, and I failed you in every possible way. She paused, wiping her eyes with a napkin, and then asked the question I knew was coming. Can you ever forgive me? I sat in silence for a long moment, letting her words wash over me. I thought about everything I had been through, all the nights I had cried myself to sleep, all the times I had wondered if I really was as worthless as they said I was. I thought about the strength I had found within myself to survive and eventually thrive despite their cruelty. I thought about the therapy sessions where I had worked through my trauma, the moments of breakthrough when I realized that their treatment of me said everything about them and nothing about my worth as a person. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady and calm. Patricia, I appreciate you saying these things. I do. It took courage to admit your failures, and I recognize that. I paused, choosing my words carefully. But here's the thing you need to understand. I forgive you, not because you deserve my forgiveness, but because I deserve peace. I forgive you because carrying around anger and resentment only hurts me, not you. I forgive you because I have built a good life for myself, and I don't want bitterness poisoning that life. Her face lit up with hope, but I held up my hand to stop her from speaking. However, I continued, forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Forgiveness doesn't mean, I'm going to let you back into my life or pretend that we can have some kind of mother-daughter relationship now. Too much has happened. Too much damage has been done. You were never really my mother, Patricia. You were the woman who gave birth to me. But you never mothered me. Miss Brennan mothered me. Fern's parents, who welcomed me into their home for holidays, mothered me. The kind neighbors who snuck me food when they knew I was hungry, they showed me more maternal care than you ever did. Patricia's face crumpled, but I had to finish saying what I needed to say. I hope your treatment goes well. I genuinely hope you beat the cancer and get to live a long life. But that life won't include me. We're done, Patricia. This conversation is my gift to you, my final act of mercy. But after today, I don't want to hear from you again. Can you respect that? She nodded slowly, fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. I understand, she whispered. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be, but I am. You became an amazing woman despite everything I did to break you. I stood up, ready to leave. Goodbye, Patricia. I hope you find peace. I walked out of that cafe and didn't look back. As I stepped onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. That conversation had been for me, not for her. It had been my opportunity to speak my truth and set my final boundary. I had faced the woman who had haunted my nightmares for so long, and I had walked away on my own terms, with my head held high. The next few months were the happiest of my life. I continued to excel in my graduate program, made new friends, even started dating someone kind and supportive who treated me with the respect I deserved. I took my first real vacation, a week-long trip to California where I stood on the beach and watched the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, marveling at how far I had traveled from that dark attic room in Connecticut. I treated myself to nice things occasionally, remembering all the years when I had nothing, allowing myself to enjoy the fruits of my hard work without guilt. One evening, I stood on the Brooklyn Bridge as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The city lights were beginning to twinkle on, and the skyline looked like something out of a dream. I thought about my journey, about the scared little girl who had been told she was a mistake, about the determined teenager who had refused to give up despite impossible odds, about the strong woman I had become. I thought about Vivian, who had tried so hard to destroy me and had ended up destroying herself instead. I thought about Patricia, Richard, and Garrett, still living in that big house in Connecticut, probably sitting down to dinner at their expensive table, surrounded by all their material wealth but lacking the one thing that actually mattered: genuine love and connection. And I realized something profound. They had said I was a mistake, an accident they wanted to forget. They had tried to convince me that I was worthless, that I would never amount to anything, that I was destined to fail. But they were wrong. I wasn't a mistake. I was a survivor. I was a fighter. I was a miracle. Every obstacle they had thrown in my path had only made me stronger. Every time they had tried to push me down, I had gotten back up more determined than before. They had given me every reason to fail, and I had succeeded anyway. Not because of them, but despite them. The greatest revenge wasn't destroying them the way they had tried to destroy me. The greatest revenge was living well, being happy, building a life filled with people who truly cared about me and work that gave me purpose. As I stood there on that bridge, watching the city I now called home sparkle in the gathering darkness, I made a promise to myself. I would never forget where I came from or what I had survived, but I would also never let my past define my future. I would continue to help other young people facing similar struggles, paying forward the kindness that people like Miss Brennan and Conrad had shown me. I would build a family of my own someday, and I would love my children with all the fierce protective devotion that Patricia had never shown me. I would prove, every single day, that you don't have to be defined by your worst moments or by the cruelty of the people who were supposed to love you. You can rise above it. You can heal. You can thrive. I pulled out my phone and texted Fern. "Hey, wanna get dinner tonight? I feel like celebrating." She replied immediately. "Always. What are we celebrating?" I smiled as I typed my response. Just life. Just being alive and happy and free. And as I walked off that bridge toward the subway that would take me to meet my friend, I realized that this, right here, was the happy ending I had been fighting for. Not perfect, because life is never perfect, but good, real, mine. I had replied to their hatred with actions, not words. I had built a life they couldn't touch, achieved success they couldn't diminish, found happiness they couldn't steal. And that was the best revenge of all. So, what about you? Have you ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your peace? Have you experienced betrayal from someone who was supposed to love you? Drop your story in the comments below, because I want to hear from you. We're all in this together, and sharing our experiences helps others feel less alone. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories about overcoming adversity and finding strength in the hardest moments. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not defined by how others treated them. Thank you so much for watching, for listening to my story, and for being part of this community. Remember, you are not a mistake. You are not worthless. You are a miracle waiting to happen. Keep fighting, keep growing, and never let anyone convince you that you're anything less than extraordinary. Until next time, stay strong and keep moving forward.